Okay, so good evening again for those who just joined. So our webinar, Back to Basics, Integrity Framework of the Green Climate Fund, will starting now. Let me first introduce Albert Lehalaha, our head of independent integrity units, to make opening for our webinar. Over to you, Albert.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. We're thrilled to have you on board here for this webinar to discuss a little bit about the independent integrity units and the GCF Integrity Framework, and introduce this discussion about how we can support you with the policies, advisory services, and an understanding of what the GCF Integrity Framework looks like. The IIU has been established to investigate occurrences of fraud, corruption, and other prohibited practices, along with investigating misconduct. But we also do prevention work where we provide these types of advisory services to support our counterparts and stakeholders to help instill integrity values in GCF-funded activities. So we're hoping that this discussion today will be fruitful. We are thankful to have you on board. This is probably one of many that we hope to have. And we'll be available to answer any questions and provide whatever support that you may have. Bayara, over to you.
Thanks, Albert, for opening our webinar. And again, thank you everyone for being here with us for this webinar, even though it's today, Friday evening in our time and maybe morning and afternoon in your country. So my name is Bayard Medash. I am the Outreach and Engagement Manager at the Independent Integrity Unit. So today's webinar is the part of our International Anti-Corruption Day campaign. We will organize series of events towards the December 9th and International Anti-Corruption Day for internal GCF staff and externally for our stakeholders. So let's begin. So today in this webinar, we will present some basics of integrity framework of the GCF. And it's divided into three sections. First, we will quickly introduce the Independent Integrity Unit's mandate and activities. And then second, we will introduce integrity policy framework of the GCF and policy obligation of stakeholders, including accredited entities. And then I quickly walk through some of the key aspects of those policies. And then third part, I will also quickly walk you through how those integrity policies will is applied in funded activities in all project cycles. So I will make about 25 or 30 minutes or so presentation with slides, and then we will open up for questions, Q&A session. So as I said, the first slides will be about the Independent Integrity Unit's mandate and jurisdiction. So before that, we would like to run a quick quiz to see your knowledge about IIU. So as you see, the question is, which of these functions, these mandates, is not a mandate of the IIU? So let's run a quiz, and you have 2 to 3 minutes to answer the quiz questions that I believe you can see on the screen. Okay, I can see people responding. Okay. So half of our participants has been answered. Okay, it's more responses. And 1 more minute and then we'll wrap up. Okay, so almost all of our participants responded. Okay, so thank you. Thank you for the active participation. As I can see, you have pretty good understanding and knowledge about the IOU's mandate. The right answer is indeed, right answer is question number 3, which is IOU does not have a mandate to conduct independent evaluation of GCF activities and to synthesize the learning. That would be a function and mandate of another independent unit, which is called Independent Evaluation Unit. And 6 out of 10 participants responded correctly. Rest of the other mandates are actually the IOU's function that has been set out in our terms of reference. Thanks again for your active participation, and let's move on. Okay. Okay, so that's here you can see the results. Now let's move on. Okay, so IOU's mandate is, as I briefly explained, it's enshrined in our GCF's governing policy, governing document, as well as the terms of reference adopted by the board. So IOU is accountability mechanism of GCF, and it's independent unit from the Secretariat. And because it's independent, it reports directly to the GCF board. And IOU does the oversight role of the internal control frameworks of the Secretariat at the GCF. And we also mandated to investigate allegations of the prohibited practices and fund-related activities and also GCF operations. And another important mandate of the IOU is we provide policy advisory to all stakeholders, not only the Secretariat, but also to AEs and other stakeholders on all the integrity-related matters, including the contractual requirements. And lastly, we also promote integrity standards across the GCF operations and the funded activities. And we do that mainly through the capacity building and public awareness raising activities. And while undertaking our mandates, operationally we divided into 3 work streams: prevention, investigation, and analytics in operation. So in the prevention work streams, we undertake, as I mentioned, all the capacity building and policy advisory, integrity due diligence and compliance activities. And within the investigation workstream, we do the investigations, alleged investigations on alleged the prohibited practices and integrity violations. So in terms of the approaches, you see we do have 2 approaches. One is the reactive, where it's based on the we take the cases, we receive the allegations in the reports and information so that we conduct the investigation. That would be our reactive approach. And then in the proactive approach, rather than the waiting a particular case or reports, we also proactively engage in the funded activities in the projects so that we prevent from potential integrity violations. So here's the diagram, how we engage and collaborate with the Secretariat. As I mentioned, IOU is separate from, we are independent unit, which means that we operate independently from Secretariat operations. However, we work closely with the Secretariat, each unit's, different units in various aspects of the integrity matters and the due diligence and compliance. So as you see, all the respective integrity due diligence matter, we work closely with specific units. With our human resources, we work on a staff code of conduct compliance issue, and with Office of General Counsel and Office of Risk Management and Compliance, we work on a compliance issue. We oversee their compliance and due diligence function, and especially in the application of the anti-money laundering and counter finance and terrorism related due diligence. And with the DCP, with the country programming unit, we work on the readiness portfolio to check the integrity due diligence, and also as well as private sector facility units. So here it shows the various integrity tools that IOU undertakes and how we engage with Secretariat in the GCF operation. So in the middle, you see the stages, the GCF operation, starting from accreditation and project approval and implementation and beyond, which includes the end of the project and follow-up activities. So here we have various integrity tools that is usually IOU employ. So as you see at the top, proactive integrity review. This is very important integrity tool, and also relatively new, and it is part of our preventive mandate. So through the proactive integrity review, during the project implementation stage, we identify and prevent or detect the potential integrity violations. And we also provide advisories on policy implementation. So that tool is applied in all stages of the programming, GCF programming. And then we also have very important data analytics tool, which is called Integrity Due Diligence Platform. It's an integrity risk rating system, data system, where it helps us to detect the early red flags and project risks. And then in all cycles, as you see, we do have outreach and capacity building tools, activities, and it applies to all stages of the programming, starting from accreditation to the end of the project cycle. And we also have the investigation, of course, one of our core function. And it also applies to the implementation stage of the programming in the projects. And then we also have digital forensics and data analytics that helps in our due diligence operation. So as I mentioned, one of our core mandate is investigation. So IOU has a broad jurisdiction in the investigation function. So as you see in terms of the jurisdiction of the entities, it's not only the GCF staff IOU does the investigation of a GCF staff misconduct, but as well as all of funded activities that includes accredited entities and any intermediaries and all other types of the EEs, in other words, executing entities and contractors, and all service providers. And in terms of the subject jurisdiction, all types of the prohibited practices, IOU have a jurisdiction to investigate. And also all types of staff misconduct is under the jurisdiction of IOU. So it's just for your information, it's past 3 years statistics that IOU has been undertaking in terms of the project-related cases. So from 2019 to 2022, as you see, we have undertaken the investigations, and you can see the breakdown and the numbers. So it was mostly related to the corruption-related cases, conflict of interest cases, and some fraud and collusion. and SEAH, and some other project-related cases. And also, I should mention that this year we had a significant increase of the project-related cases, investigation cases, and I think it's mainly due to the increase of our GCF's project portfolio and increase of the disbursement, project disbursement. Now we move into the second section of the presentation, where I will walk you through the GCF's integrity policy framework. And before I start the presentation, let me also run quickly the quiz to test your general knowledge about the integrity policy. So let's run the quiz. Okay, so please answer those 4 questions. Which of these policies apply to the GCF project cycle? So we have 4 answers. And let's give 1 minute to conclude the answers, responses. Okay, so we've got 60% participation. Okay. Okay, now let's end the poll. Okay, as you see the results, so yes, you know very well our integrity policy framework. That's the right answer is the last quiz question, which is all of these policies will apply to all project cycles of the GCF funded activities. Okay, thank you for your active participation. Okay, here's the results. Okay, now you can see the results. Thanks again. Okay, so let's start the integrity framework policy presentation. So here's the map of the policy map of the GCF integrity framework. So we have 10 policies, the set of 10 policies that has been adopted by the board that regulates all the integrity related matters that is applicable to all stages of the project cycle and GCF programming. So here you see that at the beginning, the policy on the prohibited practices. This is very important, the baseline policy that defines all types of prohibited practices, and I will explain later in my next slide. And then the next set of the policies is actually, it has detailed the policy regulations that sets out procedures and rules and requirements that is already set out in the policy on prohibited practices. And then we have the policy on protection of whistleblowers. And that policy is very important in our detection stage, detection of the integrity violation. And then we have the investigation related policy set. And this policy applied to the investigation stage of the IOU. And then the last stage, the remediation stage, where we have 2 sets of policy, the Administrative Remedies and Exclusion policy, and then staff code of conduct. So I will quickly go through each of the policy. So the first policy, as I mentioned, the policy on prohibited practices. This is a very important policy document that outlines all types of the prohibited practices in funded activities. So it also sets out the obligations of the covered individuals and the counterparties, which means It will be you, all accredited entities and intermediaries, and also actions that GCF will take in the case of the allegation or the integrity violations occur. So as you see here, GCF has a zero tolerance policy. So any types of the integrity violations will not be tolerated. It will be investigated and it will be checked against according to the policy. So the policy outlines and sets out all types of the prohibited practices. So as you see here, it's 10 types of the prohibited practices that has been stipulated by the policy, starting from the corruption, fraud, coercion, collusion, obstruction, abuse, money laundering, retaliation against whistleblowers and witnesses, and financing of the terrorism. So all these the conducts and all these wrongdoings will be prohibited in funded activities. So according to this policy, counterparties have a certain obligation. So as you see here, the first important policy obligation is to disclose any real or perceived conflict of interest to the GCF. Also, you have obligation to adopt and implement and enforce the fiduciary and administrative practices to comply with this policy. And also you have an obligation to promptly inform the GCF if in the case of the prohibited practices found or suspected or alleged. And you also have obligation to investigate any report of suspected prohibited practices. And also you have an obligation to report to IOU, or otherwise GCF, any investigation report findings. And lastly, you also have an obligation under the policy to cooperate with us, with GCF and IOU, in any investigation that is undertaken by you or undertaken by IOU. So the second policy is the policy on the protection of whistleblowers and witnesses. This is very important policy. As you recall from the previous slides, it's important policy, especially in the detection part. So here, the policy sets out the general principles and also protections and remedies for whistleblowers and witnesses, and all procedural safeguards provided by the GCF, and monitoring and reporting guidelines. So, and also provides the reporting mechanism by the whistleblowers. So, according to this policy, any person or entity may report to the IIU through all channels, available channels, by email, by social media, or by reporting channel that is on our website, or in person. And also they can request protection from IIU, from GCF, in the case of the potential retaliation. So in terms of the procedural safeguarding, of course, all the reporting will be anonymous, can be anonymous, and confidentiality will be protected, including the identity and the specific information. And IOU will provide all the safeguarding in reporting during the reporting process. So the next policy is the anti-money laundering and the countering the financing of terrorism policy. This is also a very important policy that provides the obligation to you, to all of our accredited entities and intermediaries. So it provides the principles with regard to the anti-money laundering and counter-finance terrorism standards. And the policy, the requirement is consistent with the FATF recommendation. So all the standards is designed to mitigate reputational and regulatory and legal and financial loss risks. So with that policy, GCF adopted the risk-based approach to identify and assess and understand all the money laundering and financing terrorism risks. So while undertaking this risk-based approach, we check whether counterparties doing the CDD measures, the client due diligence measures. We also check and provide the due diligence on counterparties, whether it's engaged in any prohibited practices. We also do oversee the due diligence of the financial sanctions that has been imposed by the UN. And in terms of the obligation under the policy, all accredited entities should apply their own know your customer rules, and it should be operationalized in your funded activities. And then you also, of course, you have the monitoring and the reporting obligation. So the next policy is Administrative Remedies and Exclusion policy. It's a relatively new policy. It has been adopted last year. And this is an important policy that provides the sanction regime of the projects. So the policy provides the administrative due process for the respondents before deciding on the appropriate action, which includes the exclusion on any further funding from the GCF. So there will be due process and the administrative process, and then there will be institutional arrangement within the GCF to undertake the administrative cases. And then through this process, the case review panel or officers will decide whether the individuals or entities will be excluded from the GCF, any GCF funding activities because of the prohibited engagement of prohibited practices or any types of the integrity violations. Okay, so here there's the last policy. This is with regard to the sexual exploitation and sexual abuse and sexual harassment related the policy. So GCF has adopted the policy way back in 2018. And then we have updated the policy last year. So previously it was one single policy on sexual SEAH related matters. And the current updated policy, the covered individuals are it's all GCF personnel related matters. And this policy regulates and prohibits all types of sexual exploitation and sexual abuse and sexual harassment in the workplace. And this policy is actually applicable to you, to all accredited entities and intermediaries with the new update that has been taken last year by the board. The SEAH related matters has been integrated into existing environmental and social policy of the GCF. So here we have prohibition and obligation, policy obligation requirement to the AEs on the SEAH related matters. So as you see here, there is an obligation to avoid and to mitigate all SEAH related activities in GCF funded projects, and also should provide, comply with GCF standards. And also you should, the AEs should establish institutional arrangements, including the complaints and the grievance system, grievance mechanism, and that would be survivor-centered and gender responsive. So that would be the obligation of you under this policy. Okay, so now we move into the last section of my presentation. which is about how this policy framework applies into GCF programming and funded activities and project cycles. Okay, so as our tradition, let's run the quiz to check your knowledge on the application of the integrity framework. So here's the poll. So please provide your responses. Okay, you can see half of those participants provided their responses. Okay, so let's see the results. Okay, so that was pretty easy poll. Everybody answered correctly. It's all of the above. So all the GCF's integrity policy should be applied to all stages of the policy, all project cycles and all stages of the funded activities. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so this is everybody knows the GCF business model. So here we're showing how the integrity framework applies into GCF business model. So in all stages of the operation and funded activities, the integrity framework applies, starting from accreditation, due diligence, compliance, and all the integrity framework check and due diligence, and the integrity risk framework, and all other investigative related functions. And let's start with the accreditation. So as all you know from your experience as an accredited entities with GCF, you've gone through the accreditation process. And the part of the process, we do rigorous due diligence check, and especially the few tiers of the due diligence. And first due diligence will be done by you, and there you should check the compliance and due diligence in terms of the policies, GCF policies and procedures. And then also the reaccreditation process, there will be similar, again, the same process in terms of the due diligence check, whether the GCF integrity policy framework is in place and it's been in compliance with your policies and institutional arrangement. And lastly, MAA, Accreditation Master Agreements. It also is the main document, important document, that also needs to be based on the integrity policy framework requirements. So, and during the accreditation process, the AEs have the responsibilities to do your own due diligence, to check your own financial management capacity, to prevent from any financial misconducts, and also to fulfill your requirements under MAA, and the organizational capacity and the policies, certain policies that has been set out in the MEA, whether it's compliant and in compliance with those policies. So here we have accreditation master agreements, which you all have, and maybe you also have your reaccreditation MEAs. Here you have the certain obligations and responsibilities. So in the MEA, we have the provisions that we assess the fiduciary capacity of your intermediary institutions. And there is also provision that you also should monitor the performance of intermediary entities. And also you should seek appropriate remedies for breach. So those are the provisions, obligations under the MEAs. that is related to with integrity framework, and also same in the procurement stage under the MEA, you have the obligation to comply with the rules and policies, procedures that is set out in the MEA. So if you recall in the MEA, in your signed MEAs, we have clause, a specific clause with regard to independent integrity unit. It's a clause number 13.3. There it sets out that you should cooperate with us, with the independent integrity unit, and provide the assistance in carrying out its function, which basically means investigation and all other prevention-related activities. And you also work with us in cooperation with corresponding body or unit of your organization. If you have independent integrity units or any other types of corresponding body, we should cooperate closely. And one of the modalities we signed the MOUs between AEs. And so far we have around 40 MOUs already signed and many more is underway. So we encourage you to sign with us MOUs so that we formalize our cooperation and partnership. And then, of course, you know, we besides MOU, we have other various of cooperation modalities that can be openly discussed and undertake. So this is the expert from the MEA that you have signed. This is standard clause that is mandatory in all the signed MEAs. So it's a clause number 13 with regard to compliance with standards and policies. So as you see highlighted part, it sets up the obligation to you to comply with all standards and policies and procedures, and also it obliges you to check all your intermediaries and oversee whether these policies and procedures are in compliance. And in the case of non-compliance, you have an obligation to promptly notify us and take necessary and appropriate action to remedy or to make it compliant with that policy. So also there is very important, there is very important clause here I would like to reiterate. In the case your own policy and GCF's policy is different, and your policy is less stringent than the GCF's integrity framework, then GCF's policy framework will prevail. So that's the clause that you have been agreed and signed here. Okay, so I'm very close, I'm mindful of time. So this is appraisal stage of the funding proposal. Here we do the standard due diligence in accordance with our integrity policy framework. As you see here, we check against all this, the list of due diligence based on the framework. And then here we also check during the project implementation stage, we oversee the contractual obligation of AEs, especially with regard to subsidiary agreements. As I indicated in a previous slide, according to MEA, you have obligation to oversee the compliance of your all intermediaries, which means your executing entities, all subcontractors, and all other executing entities. So IOU and GCF have oversight and monitoring rule whether this contractual obligation has been fulfilled. So lastly, it's a monitoring phase. GCF and IOU has a right to ad hoc check during the project implementation stage. So in the case of reasonable grounds to conduct ad hoc monitoring, GCF Secretariat or IOU can undertake the monitoring ad hoc check. So for example, proactive integrity review that is undertaken by IIU would be part of the ad hoc check. So through the proactive integrity review or ad hoc check, we detect any integrity violation risks or red flags in the project implementation stage. So to help the AEs to mitigate those risks. And then we have the cooperation. Here you have the reporting mandate. Reporting mandates. I'm about to finish. Last slide. So this is the reporting mandate according to the MEA. As you recall, in your signed MEA, you have all the reporting obligation, and in all these reporting cycles, you also should cover the integrity-related measures and compliance measures as well. Okay, so in the events of default, we especially if AEs engage in prohibited practices, we call it events of default. And as you see, we will terminate the funded activities and contracts, and then we invoke the sanction and exclusion of from any GCF funded activities. Okay, so IOU also has, as I mentioned in the earlier, we have mandate to help and provide assistance to all our stakeholders and counterparties, which means to all our AEs. So we would welcome to your request for advice or request for capacity building or request for information for any project-related, integrity-related matters. And thank you very much for your patience. And let's move to Q&A session. And if you have any clarification questions or any questions related to the specific policies or clarification on the presentation or slides, please, please provide those questions. Thank you. And then you can put your question in the chat box, or you can also ask your questions, I believe, through audio or video. Okay, so we have, yes, the presentation and slides will be available to you after the webinar, but with one request, we will send you the survey of the webinar with the questions with regard to your interested topics and interested capacity building activities from IIU. And with completing the survey, you will have a copy of today's presentation slides. Thank you. And if anyone have questions, please feel free to write a question in the chat box or feel free to ask through audio. And also all the integrity policies you can access from our website, as Albert put in a chat box. So you can visit the website where all the policies that I mentioned here, the full text will be available. So there is a question in the chat. What kind of support can IOU offer our counterparts? So thank you for the question. As I mentioned in a presentation, one of the important mandate of the IOU is provide advice and provide capacity building of AEs in integrity-related matters. So we can provide advisory services or advices if AEs approach us on a specific integrity-related matters, specific integrity policy implementation matters, or specific investigation-related matters. So we can provide the advice provide commentary or the policy advice on those requests if you approach to us directly. And also we provide trainings and capacity building. So starting from early next year, we will have series of webinars similar like today's. So we will have in-depth look into specific policies, specific integrity matters in funded activities. And we will also provide some knowledge products to you, some like manuals, integrity-related manuals, brochures, online Q&A short materials, so that you can have available information in handy. Okay, so the next question. So what common red flags are you seeing in the current implementation of the GCF projects? So as I presented in my presentation, the IOU is being the third line of defense of the risk management framework. We oversee our second line of the risk management and due diligence, and also GCF Secretariat, the internal control framework system. So during the project implementation and programming, we check and see whether proper due diligence has been undertaken by the Secretariat. And we also check and undertake due diligence in any ongoing MEA draft negotiation, and also funded activity contracts negotiation. And also we, through our proactive integrity review, project related ad hoc review, we check and detect any project related early risks. And then through that detected risks, we work with our AEs to mitigate those risks and prevent from future potential integrity risks. So those are the common approach IOU undertake. And common red flags is usually with regard to whether whether our AEs have sufficient capacity in institutional arrangement to comply with this integrity framework, which I just presented, and also the investigation capacity, where the AEs has sufficient capacity in the independent investigation mandate into function. So those are the issues that we carefully look and provide the oversight on. Okay, so moving on the next question on the chats. So what should, okay, so the previous one, on the 9th December is International Anti-Corruption Day. So it's an opportunity for AEs to show their commitment to anti-corruption initiatives. So what should AEs do when they identify potential misconduct and prohibited practices related to projects? So, so there is two separate parts. So in terms of International Anti-Corruption Day, as I mentioned at the beginning, today's webinar is a part of our International Anti-Corruption commemoration campaign, and we will have a series of internal and external events. And on the day, December 9th, we will also organize events, online event, and we will provide you the relevant information, invitation to all of you. And in terms of the second question, the AEs. So what the AEs obligation when they identify potential misconduct? So according to the MEA, your obligation is to promptly report to IOU and GCF, and you should start and proceed the investigation, your own investigation, and also collaborate with IOU. And in the case of the investigation, your own investigation, you should report the findings of the investigation to IOU. So those are the obligation under MEA. And also, you should report IOU on remedial measures, how you, what remedial measures you have undertaken in the case of misconduct and prohibited practices. Okay, thank you very much for those questions. And any other questions from our AEs? Okay, so we about to finish our webinar. So thank you very much for your active participation. And I know it's quite a bit of overwhelming information in one webinar, but as I mentioned, we are planning a series of webinars that will specifically address the certain integrity policies or certain prohibited practices, so that provide you with more in-depth overview of these policies or issues. And then we also planning more capacity building trainings and online activities. So we will provide you those information with you through our information through our listserv. So please stay tuned. And this is our channel to approach IOU. So through via hotline or email, reporting online or social media, you can approach us 24/7. And also in terms of the requests on the advisory and the capacity building, you also can use these channels via email or via phone or via social media, approach to us and seek assistance from us. So thank you very much. And we will, as I said, we will share our presentation slide after completion of the survey. Okay, and so see you soon in our next webinar.